Hello, Peter Hewitt, la-artistino here today with something different. Today I'm going to do a speed painting. Now I'm using a small selection of supplies to do it, so it's going to be a bit of an art challenge. These are supplies that I received in a box where you got art samples, and I'll talk about that a bit later. The supplies I got included 2 water-based markers by Dough Crafts called Artiste, and a tube of paint, flesh-coloured paint from Venezia, which is made in Italy, and a cup of desert bronze duo watercolour. Now here I'm having a bit of a play with it. I'm wetting down the watercolour and spreading it around and just seeing how it's going to act. And I do advise that you do this when you get new supplies, so you can see just what it's going to do before you start applying it to a painting. Right, I'm happy with what I got there, so I'm going to start my sketching. I've decided to sketch Myra, which if you have seen my other work, you'll know Myra is my art muse. She's a harpy, and if you know your Greek mythology, you'll know that harpies are a monster which are half female human and half bird. They have the head and the body of a person, of a girl or a woman, and the wings and the legs of a bird. And they're predatory, they're quite dangerous according to mythology. They like to eat people. And Myra, well, she does like to eat people, but or anything that sort of comes her way. But she's also a very wise, knowledgeable old harpy. And if she'll sit down and talk to you for hours about her experiences in the world and give you advice. But if she's hungry, she'll probably decide to eat you. Anyway, I'm doing a very rough sketch here and refining it with a pencil. When I'm happy with it, I move the sketch to a light box to do the tracing. I've got a light box, which is a board, which it looks like a board. It's a tablet with a perspex top and a light underneath it, and it allows you to trace things easily because the light shines through the bottom layer onto the top layer of paper. Now you can do the same sort of thing yourself. If you don't have a light box, you can use a window during the daylight. You tape your sketch to the window and then you can pop a piece of paper over the top and then get a nice clean sketch on a piece of paper. Or if you've got a glass top table, you can put a light source underneath like a torch and then use that like a light box. Here I'm just picking out the best lines that I've made in the sketch and just drawing a nice clean version onto watercolour paper because I'm going to use watercolour techniques to colour Myra. Now the watercolour paper I think was just a cheap 200 GSM paper that I picked up just to have a play around with, and actually I was pretty happy with the way this paper performed considering the price. Here I'm taping the paper down by using washi tape, or you can use the artist quality tape. It doesn't matter as long as it's tape that's not going to tear the paper when you take it off. And you need to do this because it'll stop the watercolour paper from buckling while you're working on it. It'll keep it nice and straight so you don't have all the ripples and valleys and you're fighting to keep your watercolour nice and smooth and not pooling in little ripples and valleys of the paper as it buckles. Here I'm using a technique with the watercolour pens. I didn't want to apply the markers directly to the paper to start off with because I wanted to create a nice wash for the background. So what I did was I rubbed some of the marker onto my palette and mixed it with a bit of water, and then realized that the palette wasn't smooth enough surface to do this with, so I've swapped over, as you can see here, to an old ice cream container from a supermarket ice cream tub. I like using ice cream container tops. They come in so handy when it comes for painting. They're instant palettes, and I've scribbled some of marker onto the lid of the ice cream container and then mixed it with a bit of water to make a wash and use that to paint it in. Now I'm going over the piece with the actual marker itself to create some kind of viney, interesting looking background, and just very loosely using the tip of the marker, which is a nice brush shaped tip with a very fine point, to get some nice texture and scribbly looking vines hanging down. I didn't do this while the paper was still wet. You may have seen before I had my pink little craft drying tool, which is just like a hairdryer, but it's specifically designed for craft work to dry the paper first. Now I've got a wet brush here, and just using water I'm going over where I've done the markers and smudging and smearing it all to give it a nice wet look. I'm not doing it on every little piece because I want it to be a mixture of smudgy, smeary looking marker and nice defined looking marker, and I'll give a lovely texture to the background that I can do my paint Myra over the top of. I prefer to do my backgrounds first and then concentrate on the figure in the foreground. It's just the way that I prefer to organise how I paint. You can do it either way, and sometimes I do it the other way. Sometimes I'll do the figure in the foreground first and then the background. But I find if I do the background first, then I can match the colours in of the figure in the foreground to, or whatever I'm doing in the foreground, so that the picture all looks in harmony with itself. Now, as you see, I've done a wash with the skin colour paint, the Venezia paint, and now I'm going over it using some of the marker. This is a black marker, by the way, which I have scribbled onto the ice cream container lid and then added some water. It became purplish, and that was perfect for making shadows in the skin. Now I've moved on to the wings, and this time I'm using the DS Duo Desert Bronze. That's a funny sort of a paint. It's a watercolour paint, but it's been fused with green mica, so it looks brown, but if you actually hold it up to the light, you get this lovely green shimmer all the way through it. And you can't appreciate it here, but it really does look very effective. The other thing that I noticed that this paint did was when I applied it, it sort of clumped up and made a very gravelly kind of dotty texture, sort of a speckled texture, which I really liked actually. I thought it looked really nice on the feathers. I've applied a base layer to the feathers, and as each layer dries a little bit, I'm going over and bringing more definition to each of the individual feathers, sort of adding the light and shade to them so that you can see that they actually are feathers. Now, as with watercolor technique, what I do is I apply one layer, and while it's drying I'll go and apply another layer to something else, and when that dries I'll go and apply another layer to another area, and so by the time I'm ready to continue with the first layer, it's dry and I can start adding some definition to it. So I've gone back up to the head here, and I'm defining the leaves a bit more, just using that Duo Desert Bronze paint. Now I'm using my little blowy thing here to dry the area out because I want it nice and dry so I can put some nice sharp new layers on without it blending into the previous layers. And this is because I wanted to do the face. And once again, I've scribbled some of the Docroft's Artiste black marker onto my palette, onto my ice cream container lid, and I am using it fairly darkly with very little water to pick out the details of her eyes, basically using the marker ink as a watercolour. This is something you can do with any markers. If you have got cheap supermarket markers, or if you've got, say, the Faber-Castell connector pens or any other marker, you can use this technique. You can scribble on something like an ice cream container lid, and then using a bit of water and a paintbrush, you can pick up the marker, the ink of the marker, and just use it like watercolours. It's a very fun way to use cheap markers that you would otherwise not really have much of a use for. Now I'm mixing a little bit of the Desert Bronze into the ink of the marker to create more colours. I found if I used a bit of that, I could make a nice sort of a dull kind of skin tone that I could paint with her lips with, and other bits and pieces. I found that I could mix all of the different, even though these are three completely different type of art supplies, a watercolour paint, a little micro-infused watercolour paint, and two markers are completely different things. They all kind of merged and worked very well when I mixed them together, and I could get a little variety of colour going there. Now I'm adding more definition to the feathers using the paint that I've made from the marker, from the black marker. I rather like how this black marker went very dark blue purple when I added the water. I think it's a very useful colour to paint with in this. And now working my way around the picture now and just adding definition with just the very tip of this round talcon brush. And this is I think this is the number 6 round talcon brush, which I pretty much used for the entire picture. I think at the start when I was laying the washes I went to the number 8 talcon brush, but this number 6, it's got a nice sharp point and makes a lovely thin line when I apply it the way I'm doing here, and yet the brush is bushy enough and the bristles long enough that it actually holds quite a lot of paint, so it doesn't dry out very quickly or doesn't run out very quickly. Now I've moved down to her wings and I'm adding a bit more definition to the wings, the same as I did the head. I don't go quite as dark with the wings because I want the centerpiece, or the part of this picture that I want to grab your attention to, be her head. And the way she's sort of peering at you over her shoulder. I think she's sizing me up, wondering whether I'm tasty enough or whether she's hungry enough to eat. I've moved on to the other wing now, again adding more definition to the feathers. This was a very interesting challenge. I found that having to work with such a small number of colours and different types of colours as well, different medias, was very challenging but also very freeing, because I felt free to experiment a lot more and do things I wouldn't normally have tried. Now I did say I would have a word about where I got these art materials from. I got them actually from a small company called The Artful Life, which was distributing these Artful Life boxes, which basically held samples of art supplies and unique stencils and such for people to try. And you sort of got them on subscription. You paid a subscription fee and you receive a box of different things a month, and it was a bit like a Christmas present. You never knew what was going to be in the box. Now unfortunately these boxes didn't last very long. Through no fault of her own, the owner of the company had to discontinue the Artful Box line, but the good news is that she has continued to create stencils, which is something that she specializes in. So I'll leave a link below if anybody's interested in using stencils. She has a beautiful range of them, and certainly with the Artful Life boxes, and this one in particular, did include a number of really lovely face stencils with different from profile, front view and side view that you could use in your drawings and in your mixed media. As I said, I'm just continuing now to work all the bits of Myra here, adding where I think she needs a little bit more colour and a bit more definition. I'll continue to do this, just keep going over areas, eyeballing her, seeing where she needs a little bit more of this and that until I'm happy with her. And I think I'm just about happy with her now. No, one more little dry and I'm adding just a final bit of detail with the shadows and the tips of her head feathers, her head crest. Now, happy with it. I'm peeling off the washi tape And there she is. That's all what I did with her, and I hope you enjoyed watching me do this speed painting of Myra. In the future I hope to do more speed paintings, and until next time I will see you later. I hope you're enjoying any colouring adventures that you are currently on, and until next time, happy colouring!